Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending when you're watching this, students. We are now going to start covering Module three's read section, which is constructing deviant actions and also the deviant identities, right? So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the readings. So welcome to Module 3 reading section breakdown. We'll be discussing some of the concepts you will be covering this week in the reading. So you know what, let's just go ahead and let's jump into it, right? All right, so let's first start with deviance is what? Well, deviance is constructed by those who hold power to decide what is considered deviant or not. There are two types, and these are moral entrepreneurs, which you kind of as the rule creators and the rule enforcers. We know from social power perspective, those who have more power are more likely to have opportunities, right? They're going to have more opportunities to decide what is and what isn't deviant. In Duran's study, important facets of suppression by the police, including legitimized and legitimate profiling interacting with suspected gang members, are some serious forms of police misconduct. It does not include the use of gentle encounters. So Duran looked at how deviance is enforced and finds basically that it is poor neighborhoods and people of color who have less social power, who are systematically suppressed. It is also interesting to learn while reading how Duran's lived experience allowed him to gain access to the communities, showing how the study of deviance requires more of a ethnographic approach, or as Durkheim talks about, verstehen, living in someone's shoes. So his ability to understand the area came from the fact that he himself had been once a gang member in some of the areas that he was looking into. I think that's a really cool fact about these readings. So a deviant identity allowed Duran to interview and gain trust of all the subjects and individuals who were a part of the communities being studied. And I think that's extremely worth noting when we're looking at the importance behind Duran's study and how constructing deviance is. So as I was just talking about, looking at how deviance is socially constructed, Duran looked at profiling of those within inner city, especially inner city Latinx individuals, and the use of suppression and how they would use things such as broken taillight theory to pull over people based on suspicion that they were a part of gang interactivity or association with a high school. It's a really interesting read. So how deviance is enforced, poor neighborhoods and minority neighborhoods, and then also the lived experience of Duran was a really cool part of this chapter. Now, the next conversation we're going to have here is on Pager. Now, Pager is really cool. She's an awesome individual, right? So the purpose of Pager's study is assessing the effect of the criminal record on both Black and white job seekers. Pager analyzed how crime records, how criminal records affect the opportunities for getting a job. It turns out, surprising to no one, the criminal record has a negative effect on applicants for both Black and white applicants. However, and this is what's important, it is worse for the Black men in the study. Recall the social power perspective that we've been talking about. Those who have more power or hold more power in society are also able to resist being labeled as deviant, even if they behave in a non-normative way. One thing to mention to you that's not really that known is that Pager followed up on her study. So if you read it and you find it interesting, and actually sent out emails and re-engaged with people who were part of the study, the companies that were applied for, and pointed out some of the discrepancies and racism that was in there. One thing that really stood out to me in this study personally is that in situations during the interviews in your chapter, you read about it, those who were of color actually were asked, even if they had no criminal record, if they were trying to not disclose something, or were asked about it if there was no reason to ask about it. But that was not the same experience for the white applicants who were the exact mirror. That was a big part of the study, exact mirror of these Black applicants. So it's really powerful to think about, and if you're familiar with the Boisian sociology, that's also worth mentioning, right? That idea of the veil and the double consciousness, that people who look like me, let's just be honest, when I walk into a room, I worry about, is my past gonna haunt me? That's about it. That's all I worry about. Am I going to be somebody who's going to get this job because they like what I have to say? But people who are of color and many other things, such as neurodivergencies or LGBTQ connection, worry about discrimination that they may face when they walk into these situations. So the mark of the criminal record, or even the mark of the discreditable identity. So Pager analyzes criminal records and job applicants. Main focus was between white and Black job applicants. Really cool. I'm excited for you to read it, and I hope that you share your thoughts on Yellow Dig about this. So moving forward here, we're going to talk about Liderbach's article. Now, the main focus on this article is on doctors and their prestige, also the assumed power behind the altruistic title, right? And how they are able to use the authority to resist being labeled deviant and criminal, even though Liderbach found many instances of occupational crime. For instance, the article specifically looks at how Medicaid, established more health benefits, right, for the poor, but at the same time, it created new opportunities for doctors to commit medical offenses. So it's really powerful to start thinking about this idea of how Leiderbach points out that this idea of a doctor who is the Hippocratic oath in a sense of power and authority is able to bypass that deviant identity in both ways, since they are seen as an altruistic healer. And even though thousands of people per year are victim to medical malpractice, many times we do not look at that the same way we would if someone was not a doctor. So doctors resist labeling through their social power and the impact of being in a position of power. Just as before mentioned, they can resist the label. Interesting to think about. Really powerful chapter to really go into. And we'll talk about that more in the lecture section, not the read section. Now we're going to look a little bit at the idea of deviant identities and accounts. This is a really powerful and important chapter. So without further ado, the Deviant Identity and Accounts section in Part 5 of Adler looks at how people are labeled as deviant, right? Not everyone who breaks norms or a norm is labeled deviant. Interesting, right? So the article looks at what it takes for deviance to become part of a person's identity. And it also accounts for the use of it is also used to normalize the deviant behavior. Normalize the deviant behavior. McLorg and Taub analyzed Lemert's labeling concept of primary and secondary deviance. Now, Lemert expanded on Becker's labeling theory by adding these concepts of primary and secondary deviance. Please pay attention and make sure you understand this idea of primary and secondary deviances because they're very crucial for this class. Primary deviance occurs when someone is labeled as committed a deviant act, but does not accept the label as their identity. Once a person accepts the label, it becomes part of whom and who they are. They have moved into the secondary deviance. So in their study, McLorg and Taub found that some of the subjects acknowledged they starve themselves or binge and purge both anorexia and bulimia nervosa, but they do not accept the deviant label. They're still acting in loner deviance, which would be considered primary deviance, because even though they are doing the action of starving themselves or binging and purging, they still don't consider themselves as part of this category. It's still primary. However, still others do not accept the anorexic or bulimic. Others do accept it, the label of anorexic or bulimic label, which is when they move from the secondary stage, this primary stage, to the secondary stage of deviance, and it becomes part of their identity. So once exposed, right, that's that discredited, which we'll get to. They then adhere to this idea of the secondary deviance, or the label that now becomes part of their master status. Very powerful to think about that. You may not accept the label that you were given, right? Many people break norms but are not labeled as deviant. What does it take to become the deviant identity? Well, it comes from you accepting it or others pushing it upon you that you have no choice to do so. Super powerful to think about. Really interesting chapter that goes into this idea. Said a little bit differently here, right? This is McLorg and Taub's slide. Anorexics and bulimic women. That's what I looked at. Lemert's categories of primary and secondary deviance. When you're just told you're deviant, it's not part of who I am yet. Then we have secondary, now it's part of my identity, right? Acceptance or rejection of deviant identities is very socially constructed. Now, the next topic we're going to talk about is a little bit more of a heavy hitter, and some trigger warnings apply throughout this entire book. But Scully and Marolla analyzed convicted rapists' accounts of their behavior. They interviewed rapists in prison and found either those who admitted or those who denied their wrongdoings. The researchers both found excuses and justifications for the rapes. All of the following were present in the sample of convicted rapists in the study: those who admitted they used force, those who denied contact with the victim, and those who did not define their acts as rape. For those who denied defining their actions as rape, they attempted to justify their actions in various ways to account for their actions. The researchers found themes by saying, women seduced him. The women really meant yes. Most women eventually enjoyed the act. Disgusting, right? That is that it was the woman's fault. I mean, these are things people say, right? Or that it wasn't a serious act. For those who admitted wrongdoing and accepted that what they did was rape, excuses then were used to attempt to neutralize the wrongdoing. Now, the author found excuses such as blaming alcohol or drugs or an emotional problem and painting an image of a nice guy portrayal. Both admitters and deniers worked to neutralize the rapist identities through either justifications or excuses. Now, Scully and Marolla's article is one that hits hard when you think of the situation they are looking at, right? Convicted rapists. It's powerful research. And one, I usually do, I spend more time in my in person class, but I wanted to do a little bit of a thought with you. And I want to challenge you to think outside the materials. Remove the use of a huge situation or issue such as rape. Can you think of times where you've justified, neutralized, or other types of methods that were talked about in this chapter and action that you've done? Neutralizing the interaction and used a term we'll talk about later known as saving face or saved face to protect your identity to avoid deviant labels. We chapter later when we talk about shoplifting, but you'll find neutralizations, justifications, and rationalizations in almost everyday life. I challenge you to think of some where you may have done this. Now, you don't have to tie it to as crazy or as extreme example as Scully and Marolla's work, but it's interesting to see how the depths of this can go, right? That's all for now, though. This wraps up the readings for the week. These are always the TLDR versions, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Remember, it's cool to care. And if you want to, you can pause this right here. It's little thoughts of mine, right? But I'll see you next lecture.